Once you've got some amazing pictures and an awesome story angle to work with, you're ready to start putting all of your materials together on your Walls-Worth spreads. And that means it's time to talk P22 Design. Our target here starts at the 1 level with being able to design a spread that at least has a dominant photo and a clean bleed zone. And of course, we'll talk about what these things mean momentarily. At a 3 level, you have a clear eye line, a dominant photo, consistent margins, that's a biggie, a clean bleed zone, and balanced elements. At the 4 level, you have all of those things plus the use of one design technique: contrast, proximity, repetition, white space, simplicity, and sequencing. And at the 4 level, you also have a unique layout or use extra tricks. So more than one of them in different ways throughout your spread. Okay. So when you open up your online design and you are looking at your blank page, you've got the world of possibilities ahead of you, the first thing you'll want to decide is what style of design do I want to use. There are 3 different approaches to how you'll create your pages. There's the column method, in which we start by considering a number of columns across the page. Walls-Worth is set up to have 4, as you can see here, 1, 2, 3, 4. And those become the layout of how you organize things. So you would try to align your major elements to the column lines. So you might have a dominant photo that fills up 2 of the columns, and then maybe a secondary photo that fills up 1, and maybe a series of photos that fill in here, so on and so forth. And then maybe your story is over here. And then maybe you have a sidebar that takes up this whole one over here. But the key is that things line up to the columns. The grid approach gives you a bit more flexibility in how you line up your items because you're adding to your lines that you can align to, essentially. Instead of just having the 4 sets of lines at the outside of each column, you'll see that you've got plenty of other smaller boxes that you can line up to. So you might have a dominant photo that fits here, and maybe one here, and then maybe one here, and so forth, and it lines up to all those edges. So a lot more freedom. And you can access that grid by going to the view on your Walls-Worth when you're on online design and selecting grid. Modular is a little different. We've never done a modular design at Dansville, or at least I should say not yet. Maybe this will be the year. Modular design relies not on approaching each spread as an individual piece, but as approaching each mod, as they call them, as an individual piece. So if you look at this particular spread, we've actually got a couple of different things going on here. We've got 3 different mods. We've got a mod that takes up the whole top part of the spread. This was all designed together. So we've got our headline here, we've got our dominant photo here, secondary photo, a pull quote, a series of other photos with captions. And this could be then taken and applied to any other spread, and you just drop in the content that would apply. And then you can mix and match other mods with it. We've got smaller mods down here. This particular mod has another headline, and it's got the numbers, the counts to go on with some secondary pictures. And then we've got another graphics one with numbers over here. So several different mods. Again, the key with mods is that they're interchangeable. So you might have a series of mods that are designed to take up half the spread, a series of mods that are designed to take up a quarter of the spread, and you can drop them in as you please to create unique design. A little bit more challenging, I think, than the traditional column or grid approach, but it could certainly net us some very interesting gains in our design, should we choose to go that route. Whatever you do end up choosing, be it column, grid, or mod, there are some basic concepts in design that should be followed no matter what. The first is that there should be a dominant photo. So you see here, our dominant photo is actually taking up, sorry, let me just cross him off there, over a quarter of the spread. A dominant photo is one of the best photos, well, it really should be the best photo on the page. It's going to grab readers' attention. It should be a very strong piece because of that. And you can actually have it be even larger than this. We've had some in the past that have run across the page like this. You can have it a little bit smaller, but I wouldn't go too much smaller than this. You really want a nice big piece here. You also want to have a clear eye line. So you see down here, we've got this stretch across here that has the headline and the secondary headline, the primary and secondary headlines, and we can use that as a map when we're looking at this particular spread. Now, the eye line doesn't need to fall at the bottom of the page or the top of the page, it just should be on there somewhere, a consistent line across the spread, and you can mash up different elements to it. A bleed zone is what we call the outer edges of the page, okay? And what's key here is that when you're working on online design, you can run things off the page. You'll see here, they've run the edge of that picture off the page, and that's fine, but you need to be aware that there's going to be a cutoff on there somewhere, and we're not 100% certain on where. They give us a blue bleed zone, and the cutoff is going to be somewhere in there. So you want to make sure there's nothing important in that blue cutoff zone that could unintentionally be missing from the yearbook. Certainly no text. Consistent margins are critical for an organized yearbook. If you look closely here, you'll see that the distance between these pictures and these pictures is the same. And over here, it is the same. Those are called consistent margins. Down here, it's a little bit wider than up above, but it's still consistent to each other. And they've used a dividing line to make it so that those white spaces from box to line are the same margin as up here, just to create more consistency. Okay, so consistent margins, that is critical. As far as balanced elements goes, this is a 2-level item that you should have. You want to make sure that if you have your dominant spread over here, you have enough secondary photos here to help balance this. It's just like with our photography, we talk about balance. You don't want to have weird empty gaps. That's not to say that white space is bad. If you take a look, we've got some white space up here going on, and it's totally fine. But we need these photos here to balance the dominant photo here. Once you've got your basic elements under control, you're ready to start thinking about other techniques that you can use to make your design more interesting. Contrast is one element that can certainly be very interesting. Here in this example, we've got the contrast of a very large dominant photo to text. Okay, so that's one way of thinking about contrast. You might also consider the color use here, although that's getting us into another text. We've got that very extreme light to dark contrast as well, so it's kind of a double contrast, if you will. Proximity is another technique that you might use. It's a fairly easy one to use. If we go with mod design, it especially works well with that. Basically, the idea with proximity is that items that relate to one another are close to one another. So if you look here, we've got a sidebar down here or a separate mod, and it looks like, sorry, it's hard to read that, but it looks like they've got players' names and some fact about them. They've placed these images closer together. The margin's narrower there than it is to the dominant photo to indicate that this is a separate mod. They're using proximity to indicate that we should look at this as one whole piece. Same thing over here. These images are all connected, and so we should look at that as a piece based on their proximity. Repetition is another element that you might find interesting to use. And repetition we can think of in a couple of different ways. First, there's repetition across spreads. So I want to draw your attention to this line here. You don't have another spread from this book to compare it to, but within this yearbook, they use those lines underneath their dominant headline or their primary headline as an element of repetition across the whole book to help create unity. So that's one way you might look at repetition here. We also have some repetition in the structure here of the times. We're repeating how that's formatted down the side, so that's another way to think about it. White space doesn't have to be your enemy. In fact, white space can be used very effectively, especially on theme pages like your division spreads, your opening and closing spreads. Here we see there's a lot of white space going on in the top and the bottom. But what that's doing for us is drawing all of our attention to this really cool picture and this really big primary headline. Okay, so white space can help us make the items that we really want on that page stand out. Simplicity and sequencing are the last two techniques we're going to talk about. Simplicity, in a way, relates to white space in the sense that you don't have a ton going on your spread. This isn't a thematic spread. This is just a regular spread. We've got one image, and it's fancied up with some unusual edges here. And then we've got one story with a headline, and that is it. It's a very simple piece, conveys a message, still gets an image in there, but not a lot going on. Sequencing is one that you might find easier to use if you've got a lot of pictures you want to include. Sequencing refers to how we read through the page, right? In a traditional book, we read like this, right? If we're looking at a page and then we go over here and we read like this. Well, that same concept of reading in order can apply to a yearbook, but perhaps in a different way. So when you look at this example, the images here are actually arranged to draw our eye in a circle around like this. So we'd look at these images with the captions first and work our way around, and that's called sequencing. You're essentially creating a line with the elements that you put on the page and drawing your reader into your dominant photo last. So those are just some quick tricks that you might use in your design. A lot of these will be based on thematic design, right? When you develop your theme, you're going to choose some of these that you're going to highlight, use those as a basis for your design pages, and then we'll build the rest of the yearbook around that.